this is Dr. India Monet here. Thank you for joining this channel, Warriors for the Kingdom. I have a mighty word for you today. If you have not checked out the other videos, look at the link in the description. I have 2 videos. I want you to check that out before you click on this video. The first video is preparation for war. The second one is purification. And this video is going to be rebuilding the altar. I am so excited. Let's dive on in. All right, so 2 Chronicles chapter 29. We're going to dive right in. 2 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 18. It says, Then the Levites went to King Hezekiah and gave him this report. We have cleansed the entire temple. Let's just stop there. We have cleansed the entire temple. So we first begin with the reopening of the temple. This is 2 Chronicles chapter 29. King Hezekiah reopens the temple. He removes all the foul things. Then he goes into a purification stage, right? There's a cleansing. Now he says the altar of the burnt offering with all its utensils, and the table of the bread of the presence with all its utensils. And so what happens now is an altar is built. What is an altar? It is a place or a platform where a sacrifice can be placed. An altar is simply a place or a platform where a sacrifice can be placed. And so my question to you is, do you have an altar built? Is there an altar built for the Lord to speak? What is the importance of the altar? You can't place a sacrifice on the floor. The sacrifice has to be on the altar. The altar allows for an open heaven to take place, which is also known as a highway. Why is a highway important? A spiritual highway is important. First, let me just say this. You need to be cleansed in order to do it, in order to allow for an open heaven or a highway. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, there the Lord can be in the midst. For the Lord to be in the midst, because He's so holy, you have to be cleansed. Right? If you look at the Old Testament, people that were on their menstrual cycle, they were not allowed, they had to be distanced or away for a certain period of time because they were considered dirty. Right? So there's a cleansing before you present yourself. And so our job as the chosen ones are to repair the broken altar of God. Our God will answer us based on the altar being rebuilt, and a fire will be descended. Let's go to 1 Kings chapter 18. 1 Kings chapter 18. I want to dive into verse 36 because I want you to see the importance of why Elijah did what he did. This is the altar of Baal versus the altar of the Lord. At the usual time for offering the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet walked up to the altar and prayed. Let me stop there. It says at the usual time. The reality is when you build the altar, there is a time. There's a specific time you should be presenting your case to the Lord. Now, I want to say that the Lord gave me a word and He said appointment. What is an appointment? An appointment is an appointed place. An appointed is an appointed time. It is a meeting. It is a gathering. It is a pre-arranged meeting. I said an appointed place. An appointed place also means an altar. But I didn't stop there. I said there's an appointed time. What time have you set for God? Did He say pray at midnight for 2 hours? Have you been up praying at midnight for 2 hours? It says, Elijah said, at the usual time for the offering, the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet walked up to the altar and prayed. The reality is there was a set time. There was a prearranged time that he went to go meet with God. There was a specific time he gave to God. Therefore, God already knew the time he was getting ready to meet Elijah. When you're getting ready to make a phone call to your friend, you set up a time. When you're getting ready to meet up with a boss, there's a scheduled time. The reality is the way the earth works is a reflection of the spiritual realm. Have you scheduled time with God? My God, who am I talking to? Have you scheduled time with God? The time that you're supposed to be spending with God is the time you're using to watch Netflix. The reality is Netflix have gotten you no breakthrough. Come on. Who am I talking to? The time you're using to scroll on Instagram and scroll on Facebook, the reality is that scrolling time has not given you breakthrough. And so you're asking God at whatever time you have time to ask God, and God is saying, where is my appointed time? My God. Hallelujah. Daniel, he prayed 3 times a day. There was an appointed time he prayed. There was a specific time he gave God. And that is why God has answered. Let's keep going. In First Kings chapter 18, it says, let's go to verse 37. Oh Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you are God. Aren't you tired of being mocked? Aren't you tired of being insulted? You've been asking God for this marital breakthrough. You've been saying, God, where are you? You've been saying, God, why is this happening to me? You've been asking, God, why in the world is this going on? Didn't you promise me this thing? Didn't you say he or she is my husband? Didn't you say, can I not hear the Lord? It is not that you can't hear the Lord. It's that you haven't built the altar, and it's that you haven't placed the sacrifice. Sacrifice of time. You're missing the appointed time to speak to the Lord, and that's why he's not answering. My God, who am I talking to? Let me keep going. It says, oh Lord, our God, and that you have brought them back to yourself. Immediately, in verse 38, it says, immediately the fire of the Lord flashed down from heaven and burned up the young bull, the wood, the stones, and the dust. Elijah came at the appointed time. He went to the appointed place. I'm talking to somebody. And based on the communication from the open heaven, the Lord was able to answer immediately. Let's go back to 2 Chronicles chapter 29. Because I want to talk about sacrifice. You don't have an altar without the sacrifice. It is with the sacrifice that the Lord is able to receive. A sacrifice is something you give of great value in exchange for protection, vindication, intervention, peace, blessing, joy, whatever you're asking God for. It is something you give of great value. Now, I want to go into 2 Chronicles chapter 29. Let's go to verse 25. It says, King Hezekiah then stationed the Levites at the temple of the Lord with cymbals, lyres, and harps. He obeyed all the commands that the Lord had given to King David through Gad, through King Sears. Now, let's go to verse 27. It says, then Hezekiah ordered the burnt offering be placed on the altar. As the burnt offering was presented, songs of praise to the Lord were begun, accompanied by the trumpets and other and other instruments of David. Now, let me just stop here, because you're saying, God, what burnt offering? Now, okay, I want you to understand there's a difference in the Old Testament versus the New Testament. In the Old Testament, they had to give animals as burnt offerings. They sacrificed animals. This is why they had fires being raised, and that's why in First Kings chapter 18, there was a process that Elijah had to go through as far as giving the bulls and stuff to be able to present to God. Now, in the New Testament, we understand that Jesus sacrificed his son. God sacrificed his son Jesus on the cross. And because the blood was shed, and because God sacrificed his son, we no longer have to sacrifice burnt animals. We no longer have to give animals for God to hear. Are you understanding? And so in placement of burnt offering, you can give a sacrifice by taking communion. And that is in remembrance that the Lord sacrificed himself for you and I because he loved us. Which granted us access to speak to God directly. We don't have to go through prophets. We don't now have to go through priests to be able to speak to God. We can speak to God directly due to him dying on the cross. So in placement of the burnt offering, you can take communion. Sacrifice God. If you don't have communion, get a bottle of water. God, I sacrifice this water to you. Let it be the replacement for the blood that you shed on Calvary. And drink it. And that will be your burnt offering. It says that in verse 25, that they gathered in the temple with cymbals, because another form of sacrifice is praise. We bring a sacrifice of praise into the house of the Lord. Praise is thanksgiving to God. In the beginning, when in the first video I made, I said that there's a list that you need to go through in 2025, what God has done for you. Not only in 2025, but also in 2024. What has God done for you? And write out the list, because there's times that the enemy will try to plant in your head that God hasn't done anything. And you're saying, God, you haven't answered me, but God has answered you. God, you haven't made ways, but God has made ways. Write it down so that you can remember what the Lord has done. And in that, you can give thanksgiving to God. I want you to go deep. Not just, God, you gave me life, and God, you gave me health, and we thank God for it. But I want you to go in deep things. God, what have you answered that I prayed for? Was it that I had no rent money to pay my bills and you answered me the next week? Was it I had no food, no money for food, but Father, you had somebody pay for me for my groceries? What has the Lord what has he done? What has he answered? Write it down, give him thanks. And then I want you to give God worship. Worship is a way of showing God that you love him. The reality is God loved you so much that he gave his son. In what ways do you love God? God, you're amazing. God, you're awesome. God, I thank you for being God. God, I thank you for your protection. God, I just give you thanks for who you are. Oh, glory be to God. We worship you, God. We love on you today, Lord. How do you love? You're asking for love, but have you given love to the one who loves you the most? This is the word of the Lord for this video. The rebuilding of the altar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get the email set up and everything done so that we can gather together, because where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am in the midst. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am in the midst. And we're going to start a prayer call. And we're going to start praying for manifestation to take place. Open up your hearts and open up your mind to what God is getting ready to do. And I know I'm talking in 2025, but this word might be for you in 2026. This word might be for you in 2027. Whatever year you're listening to this word, I want you to go back and go into preparation for war. And I'll have the links in the description. Purification. And then enter this word, the rebuilding of the altar. For this is the process to receive the promise